Hey, hello, my name is JoJo and welcome back to my channel. Or if you're new here, welcome. Alright, so we couldn't talk about applications without talking about diversity statements. Figuring out what to write in your diversity statement can be hard, especially if you're a member of the BIPOC community or another marginalized group, because really almost everything we do can involve diversity efforts and maneuvering systemic inequalities and oppression. And I mean, even like our entire personal statement can feel like one long diversity statement. And really, it's like, why are we even writing a diversity statement in the first place? If anything, programs should be writing diversity statements for us as responses to our applications. It just feels really backwards to me. But nevertheless, programs want diversity statements and we have to write them. So today we're going to talk about 5 things you should keep in mind when you're writing your diversity statement. So before I get into everything else, the first thing I want to mention is that there's kind of like this overarching theme or question that you should keep in mind just as a whole, even with like the other things that I'm going to mention. And that is how whatever you answer to the next 5 questions, how will it help you in the program you're applying to? At the end of the day, you have to keep in mind that you're writing this with the purpose of getting accepted into a program. And so you have to somehow find a way to connect everything you're about to write to how it will benefit the program somehow. So with that out of the way, let's get into the questions. So number 1, you want to ask yourself probably the most basic question, and that is, what does diversity mean to you? When thinking about this question, focus on the more generally understood definition of diversity. So that means ethnicity and race, social class, gender and sexuality, ability, and stuff like that. This is most likely what the program is referring to when they say diversity. And so try to keep as close to these identities as possible when answering the rest of the questions and writing your diversity statement. Number 2 is asking yourself, what is your story? Of the identities that I listed, do you hold any that have impacted you in your work in some way? No 2 people have the same story, so don't be afraid to share yours to the extent that you feel comfortable. However, you do want to avoid mentioning or describing anything that could make it seem like you don't, or that you want to avoid mentioning or describing anything that could make it seem like you wouldn't be able to handle the intense workload of a PhD program. So this includes things like mental illness, any significant gaps in your education. I don't know, programs just seem to not like when you talk about that stuff. When I applied to PhD programs the first time around, I did address the gap in my education history and my experience with mental health because they kind of tied together. And when I was applying my second time around, my mentor was like, no, don't do that. Unless you can somehow make it sound like a really, really, really positive experience that will somehow drastically impact your experience in the program, like, don't do it. And so yeah, I don't know, it's just a thing they don't like to see. The third question you want to ask yourself is, why is diversity important to you? Tying back to the previous question, this is more of a question of how do your various identities motivate you, or how have they motivated you? How do they inform how you move through the world? How do they help you understand yourself and others? Those are all kind of balled up into that one question, and trying to figure out how and why diversity is important in your life and in your work. The fourth thing you want to ask yourself is, does your work currently, or does the work you are hoping to do in the program somehow connect to diversity efforts and how. So what contributions to diversity and equity have you made through your work and how, or what contributions are you hoping to make? Does your work involve, or do you want it to involve, service to underrepresented communities? Are you making any conscious decisions about how you can best avoid harm to these communities in working with them? Are you advocating for structural and systemic change? Again, all of those questions are kind of like balled into that one overarching question. The last question you want to ask yourself, especially if you said no to any of the questions that I mentioned for number 4, is how will you ensure moving forward that your work is inclusive and connects to those diversity efforts? So if you haven't consciously thought about any of these questions before, now's your time to think about them and come up with some serious answers, especially in wanting to go into the field of psychology and working with people. Like, these are questions that you should be asking yourself. So those are just a few things that I think are really important to keep in mind when writing a diversity statement. Something to note is that you might not have the space to address all of these questions in your diversity statement, or like you might not have the space to just speak to all of the things that are kind of floating through your mind as you think about them. Some programs ask for diversity statements that are almost as long as your personal statement. Some programs just want a paragraph. I don't know. It's really inconsistent, but that's okay. Just give it some thought, some serious thought, and just speak to what's most important to you, and you'll get your point across. So that's all for this video. Thank you for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. This probably ended up being a really short video because diversity statements are typically pretty short, and so not much goes into them. So yeah, leave me a comment down below if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and click that little notification button so you don't miss my next upload, and I will see you in my next one.